Rain fell over Rome as if the sky were mourning something that hadn't even happened yet. Through the shattered, stained glass of an old cathedral, a woman walked with a heart locked in iron, the mafia boss who had learned too early that love and weakness were the same poison. That night she was marrying for power, and before everyone she would say, "Don't expect love from me." But fate, impatient as ever, was already smiling in the dark. Because when the heart decides to break its own rules, not even the strongest empire can stand in its way. The old church smelled of incense and iron, as if the past itself were watching that ceremony, one that was never meant for love. Valentina Moretti walked slowly down the aisle, each step sharp and steady like the touch of a blade. Her veil fell like mist over an unreadable face, and beneath it, the cold eyes of a woman who had learned that power allows no distractions. The lights glimmered against the golden walls, but nothing shone brighter than the control with which she carried herself, tall, distant, almost inhuman. Adrian Castellano waited for her at the altar, still as a statue carved from stone. The black suit wrapped him like armor, and his silent eyes followed the approach of the woman everyone feared. To the crowd it looked like pure glamour, the marriage of two empires, a union sealed in luxury and promises of peace. But the air inside that church tasted of gunpowder and expensive perfume. It was a wedding without love, without touch, without faith. A cold transaction, signed in silence and calculated like war. When she stopped in front of him, the world seemed to bend. Neither of them smiled. The space between their bodies was a border made of steel. Her breathing was steady, his gaze unshaken. Neither one gave in. The priest's words echoed in the distance like a forgotten language, while the guests watched with a mix of curiosity and fear. The ringing of the bells didn't celebrate, it judged. Each toll nailed another burden onto Valentina's back. Love wasn't welcome there. It was a dangerous intruder. When it came time for the vows, Adrian spoke first, his voice calm, deep, unshakable. His I do didn't ask for permission. It sounded like someone accepting a challenge. Hers, however, was cold, without a tremor, like winter settling in slowly, consuming everything around it. And before anyone could dream of romance, she spoke her sentence before them all. "Don't expect love from me." The words echoed like both a warning and a vow. The entire room held its breath. The marriage was sealed, not by affection, but by threat. The applause came hesitantly, almost mechanical. Men toasted out of duty. Women whispered about the fate of a queen without a heart. Valentina walked with her head held high, shoulders lifted as if carrying an entire empire. Adrian followed one step behind, his eyes discreet, curious, analytical. He saw beyond the myth. He saw the emptiness behind the fortress. And in that silence, stretched between glasses and whispers, something shifted. It was barely noticeable, but somehow the world seemed to breathe differently around them. In the banquet hall, the gold of the glasses reflected false smiles. Valentina watched every face with the precision of someone who had survived betrayal. Adrian studied the room with the calm of a man who understood the value of patience. When their eyes met, time seemed to hold its breath. No glance away, no words spoken, only the invisible tension of two kingdoms on the verge of collision. The dancing began, and she turned down every invitation with the slightest gesture. Adrian didn't insist. He stayed close, yet respected her space. And even from a distance, something sparked between them. A silent current of curiosity burning beneath the surface. She was power, he was mystery. And together, without even touching, they were already setting the room on fire. During the toast, Valentina raised her glass with the same firmness she would hold a weapon. "To sustainable peace," she said, and the hall responded with a chorus of forced applause. Then Adrian added, "To the courage of choosing what's difficult when it's right." His words hung in the air, breaking the script. She looked at him, surprised, just for an instant, and the crowd felt the shift. Something new stirring in the space between them, something that hadn't been written into the contract. Hours later, on the terrace, a cold wind moved the veil she still hadn't taken off. Valentina gazed at the city like someone studying a chessboard. Adrian approached quietly. "Need some air?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, just took a deep breath, her eyes lost somewhere far away. The breeze carried the scent of rain, and for a second, the steel in her eyes seemed to fade. He said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only language fear understands. Back at the mansion, her heels echoed on the marble steps like war drums. Adrian followed behind, watching the way she never looked back. She was a woman used to loss and to never showing it. In the bedroom, her dress rested over the chair, and the mirror reflected two versions of the same soul: Valentina, the mafia boss, and Valentina, the woman who once loved too much to ever love again. She opened the window, letting the midnight wind in. Outside, the city slept, unaware of what was breaking inside her. "Don't expect love from me," she whispered again, but this time her voice was softer, almost tired. Adrian stood at the door in silence, simply watching. A thunderclap tore through the sky, and for a moment, she looked like a solitary figure framed by the storm, beautiful, cold, and tragic. The cold promise had been made, yet the night itself seemed to know that no vow can stand against destiny. And somewhere between the sound of the rain and the silence of the room, something began to change, something neither of them would ever be able to control. The wedding dinner felt like a disguised continuation of the war. The golden lights of the mansion reflected off crystal glasses and uncertain glances. Valentina Moretti sat at the head of the table like a queen exiled from her own throne, every movement calculated, every word deliberate. Adrian Castellano sat beside her, calm, watching her like a man facing a wild creature, alert, but not afraid. The silence between them was thick, charged with restrained electricity. And still, no one dared to break it. While the guests talked about alliances and profits, Adrian watched her in secret. He saw beyond the dress, beyond the flawless makeup. He saw the loneliness she tried to hide between sips of wine. Valentina felt his gaze but didn't return it. She preferred to keep the game intact, the icy theater that sustained her power. Yet beneath that studied silence, there was something different. He didn't seem to want to challenge her, but to understand her. And to her that was the most dangerous gesture of all. Then suddenly Adrian broke protocol. He looked at her and said softly, just loud enough for her to hear, "Maybe love doesn't need your permission to happen." The words fell between them like a spark in a field of gunpowder. Valentina slowly lifted her gaze, sharp, merciless. No man had spoken to her like that since she'd taken power. And in that instant, amid the distant sound of music and the clinking of silverware, the crowd felt it. The empire of Valentina Moretti had begun to crack. She replied with a faint, almost cruel smile. "Careful what you wish for, Mr. Castellano. Not every kind of love is a blessing." Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed something, a brief flicker of fear. Adrian didn't look away. His gaze stayed steady, firm, as if recognizing a dangerous mirror. And for the first time, Valentina felt seen, not as a boss, but as a woman. Their conversation became a minefield of elegant provocations. Every sentence carried a hidden truth. Every held glance revealed something neither dared to confess. The tension between them grew like an invisible electric wire, and the other guests pretended not to notice. Yet it was impossible to ignore the feeling that something unplanned was about to be born. In the middle of the table, Adrian raised his glass. "To truth," he said without smiling. The toast echoed oddly, almost defiant. Valentina lifted hers slowly, with measured grace, and replied, "To the lies that protect us." The crystal glasses touched, and the sound was like a spark in the air. Behind that toast, there was a duel, not of weapons, but of souls. She tried to understand what drove him. Power? Curiosity? Desire? Adrian, however, only watched her defenses with quiet respect. There was no arrogance in his gestures, only a dangerous calm, the kind that disarms before it strikes. And it was exactly that serenity that began to dismantle the walls Valentina had spent a lifetime building. After dinner, the two found themselves alone in a softly lit corridor. Valentina walked ahead, firm and steady, until she felt his presence just a few steps behind. She stopped, turned. Their eyes met in silence. "I'm not used to being followed, Mr. Castellano." He gave a slight smile. "And I'm not used to bowing my head." The reply cut through the air with the precision of a polished blade. Her breath faltered for a fraction of a second, invisible to the world, but not to him. Adrian took a step forward, not in defiance but instinctively. She held her posture, yet inside her heartbeat had already changed its rhythm. It was a duel of wills, where touch hadn't yet existed. But danger was already all around them. Valentina studied him with the same precision she used to assess an enemy. Yet the more she analyzed him, the more she realized she couldn't find the threat. And maybe that was the real danger. He didn't seem to want anything. He didn't want power. He didn't want fear. He just wanted to understand what existed behind the woman everyone treated like a myth. Deep down, she began to wonder if he was brave or simply foolish. Either way, it didn't matter. The effect was the same. For the first time in a long while, Valentina didn't know how to react. Words felt too dangerous, and silence too unbearable. As he walked past her to leave, his scent lingered in the air, woody, calm, almost provocative. She watched his silhouette fade into the corridor, and for a brief moment, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: curiosity. Not about the man, but about what the man saw in her. In her room, standing before the mirror, Valentina's reflection looked different. His words echoed relentlessly in her mind. Maybe love doesn't need your permission to happen. She hated herself for thinking about it. Hated even more the fact that, for the first time, someone had made her doubt her own strength. Adrian, in his office, poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared out the window. Outside, the mansion slept. But he knew, nothing in that place ever truly slept. Valentina Moretti was the kind of woman who could turn any silence into a storm. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he wanted to witness that storm up close. The midnight wind brushed against the curtains, and the distant sound of rain carried a sense of omen. Two forces had collided, and nothing in the world could pull them apart without breaking them first. Power, pride, and desire had been poured into the same glass. Their first toast was already made, invisible, inevitable, and dangerous. The first days after the wedding felt like a minefield wrapped in silk. The Moretti mansion, with its endless corridors and tall windows, seemed to watch their every move, judging, waiting for the first mistake. Valentina set boundaries the very next morning, cold, clear, and impossible to cross. Every room is a territory, every word a currency, and I owe nothing to anyone. Adrian simply nodded. Not because he agreed, but because he understood. The war she was fighting was with herself. She kept her distance. Slept in a separate room, dined in silence, and spent her nights locked in her office, where the lights never went out completely. He would see her shadow moving across the wall and wonder what kept that woman awake when the rest of the world slept. Sometimes he heard the sound of a glass being set down. Other times the soft rustle of a page turning. It was the only sign of life in that marble fortress. Adrian respected her space, but his curiosity burned beneath the surface like fire under ice. He knew there was something about her that pulled him in. Not her beauty, not her power, but the wound she hid behind her gaze. On quiet nights, he found himself wondering what could have broken a woman so composed. And every time he did, desire tangled itself with compassion. Valentina, on the other hand, couldn't stand the idea of being watched. She carried an old fear within her, the fear of being seen. To her, love had always meant weakness, and weakness meant death, so she hid. She wore invisible armor, spoke little, and avoided any kind of touch. There were nights when she'd sit for hours, staring into nothing, a glass in her hand and her heart in ruins. One night, Adrian woke to a faint noise. He got up, barefoot, and walked into the hallway. The light from the study was still on. Curiosity pulled him forward like a tide. When he opened the door, he found Valentina standing in front of a bookshelf, staring at an old photograph, a portrait of Luca Moretti, her brother. His face was frozen in a smile, trapped in time, and for a moment she looked like someone else, vulnerable, lost, human. She noticed him and instantly slipped back into her armor. "Do you not remember I set rules?" Her voice was cold, her eyes unreadable. Adrian answered calmly, "I do. I just thought maybe you wanted some company." She gave a short, joyless laugh. "Company is the first step toward ruin," he shrugged lightly. "Then let me be your ruin if that's what it takes." She didn't answer. Turning toward the window, she watched the rain begin to fall. The sound of raindrops against the glass filled the silence between them. Adrian didn't know whether to leave, but something kept him there. Maybe the sense that if he walked away, she'd fall apart. The tension between them was almost tangible. Two worlds sharing the same room, separated by a few steps and a canyon of pride. He wanted to reach out, but knew that doing so would end whatever fragile trust they had. She wanted to push him away, but couldn't. The air grew heavy, slow, thick with meanings neither dared to name. For a moment, Valentina closed her eyes. The memory of her brother returned like a blade, cold, necessary. Luca, the only one who'd ever made her believe that kindness and power could coexist. When she opened her eyes, Adrian was still there, motionless, silent, respectful. And that, more than any touch, disarmed her. He took a single step forward. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. She drew in a slow breath, her chest rising and falling as if each inhale came at a cost. "I'm not pretending," she replied, though she knew it was a lie. Adrian noticed, but didn't call her out. He just looked at her, and in that look was a truth she couldn't bear. He saw her. Time slowed in that room. The rain became the soundtrack of a wordless confession. Valentina put the photo away, turned off the light, and walked to the door. Before leaving, she glanced back at him one last time. "Good night, Mr. Castellano," he answered. "Good night, Mrs. Moretti." And when the door closed, the silence left behind felt more intimate than any touch could ever be. That night, Adrian didn't sleep. He kept wondering how someone could be so strong and so broken at the same time. Valentina, meanwhile, spent hours in front of the mirror, trying to find in her reflection the woman she used to be before she lost everything. And for the first time in years, the mirror offered no answers at all. Dawn came slowly, and the mansion woke up to its rituals of power. Breakfast was served in silence. She flipped through the newspapers, and he watched her discreetly. Neither spoke about what had happened the night before, as if that moment had never existed. But both knew something had changed. The distance between them was the same, yet it carried a new weight. Every step taken inside the house seemed aware of the other's presence. Every stolen glance had meaning. The mansion that once felt carved from stone now seemed to breathe, as if its corridors had witnessed the beginning of something dangerous. Valentina didn't allow touch, but she had already been touched in another way. Adrian hadn't kissed her lips, but he already knew the rhythm of her breath. And that invisible closeness bound them tighter than any promise ever could. In the following days, the tension grew in silence. With every meal, every exchanged glance, the sense that they were about to break their own rules became unbearable. The vow of distance was turning into torment. One afternoon, while Adrian was on the phone discussing business, she appeared in the doorway, watching him for a few seconds. He hung up and stood, waiting for an order, a warning, anything. But Valentina simply said, "I don't know what you want from me." He answered, "Nothing. I just don't want to be another man you've lost." She stood there motionless. Her heart raced, though her face remained unreadable. Then she turned and left without a word. Adrian stood still, listening to the echo of her footsteps. And he understood. The war between them had begun. A silent war made of glances, breaths, and everything neither dared to name. That night, as the clock marked the uncertain hour between yesterday and now, Valentina heard footsteps in the hall again. She knew who it was, yet she didn't move. She let him pass. Let the house breathe for them. Let love, still nameless, begin to fill the space between the walls. A love dangerous, invisible, and impossible to contain. Valentina Moretti's nights were haunted by ghosts. Not all of flesh or memory. Some were born from the weight of choices she'd never confessed to anyone. The name that hurt the most echoed inside her like a forbidden prayer. Luca, her younger brother. The only one who had known her heart before it turned to stone. When he died, something inside her went dark, and the rest of the world paid the price. Luca wasn't like the other Morettis. He had an easy smile, clear eyes, and believed that power could live alongside kindness. While the others learned to kill, he learned to forgive. And maybe that was why he was the first to die. Valentina never forgot the sound of the gunshot that night, or his face. Stunned, trying to understand why love was always the most expensive currency. It was an inside betrayal, planned with cold precision and executed flawlessly. One of her own capos, a man she herself had promoted, sold out the Moretti name in exchange for power and survival. Valentina found out too late. When she arrived, Luca was already lying on the ground, and snow was falling over his body like the confetti of a silent funeral. She didn't cry. She only knelt down, ran her hand across her brother's face, and swore that no one would ever make her feel pain again. From that night on, the woman died, and the boss was born. Her heart became currency. Love, a threat. Words began to mean less than silence. The name Moretti, once synonymous with family, became a symbol of fear. Valentina built her empire not to win, but to forget. Every enemy defeated erased a memory. Every new alliance was just another way to ensure she would never be vulnerable again. That's why her marriage to Adrian Castellano wasn't love. It was an armistice, a truce between two worlds tired of war. She had accepted it because she needed to protect what was left of her legacy. The Council of Families demanded a gesture of trust, and Adrian seemed the perfect choice. Educated, composed, strong enough not to be manipulated. The problem was that time began to betray the plan. His constant calm presence started to dissolve the concrete around her. Valentina began to notice small gestures that unsettled her, the way he listened, the respect in his eyes, the silence that didn't judge. And without realizing it, she began to remember Luca, the same light in the eyes, the same courage to stand firm in the face of danger. It was as if fate itself had decided to toy with her wounds. She hated it. Hated the way the past crept into the present, turning her cold resolve into doubt. Night after night she replayed her brother's last moments, the promises whispered before death took him. Protect the name. Don't lose yourself. That was all he managed to say before the blood silenced him. And somehow Adrian was dismantling everything she had sworn to uphold. One night, alone in her office, she opened a drawer that had been locked for years. Inside was a faded letter written by Luca. The handwriting trembled, as if the paper still carried the warmth of his hands. Power isn't a shield, Val. It's a chain. And one day, you'll want to break it. She read it silently, eyes dry, throat tight. The rain against the windows seemed to echo his words. Chain, chain, chain. Adrian entered without being announced. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. She looked up, ready to scold him, but he only said, "I thought maybe you could use a little forgetting." His tone was calm, no curiosity, no intrusion. She accepted the glass and drank. The burn of the whiskey was sharp, but not as sharp as the memory. Luca Moretti, he said quietly, glancing at the name on the letter. She froze. Where did you hear that name? Her voice came out low, defensive. I heard the others whispering, he replied. They say he was your only weakness. She took a deep breath, her eyes steady. No, he was my strength. The world just confused the two. For a moment, the silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt like respect. Adrian watched her carefully, finally understanding the reason behind her armor. And Valentina, for the first time, realized that someone was seeing her without fear. That frightened her more than any weapon ever could. What if love is just another form of power? She asked, not really expecting an answer. Adrian thought for a moment before replying, Then it's the only power that can set you free. The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. She looked away, pretending indifference, but her heart had already recorded every syllable. When he left, Valentina found herself alone again. The rain had stopped, but the scent of wet earth drifted through the open window. The wind swayed the curtain and scattered papers across the desk. Among them was Luca's letter. She ran her fingers over his name and closed her eyes. Chain, she whispered softly, and realized she might already be breaking hers without even noticing. Morning found Valentina still awake, sitting by the window with the letter in her hands. Outside, the world went on as if nothing had changed, but something inside her had given way. The coldness that once served as armor now felt like an old shelter, too fragile to hold back what was coming. As the sun crawled lazily over the horizon, she understood. Adrian Castellano was no longer just part of a deal. He was the mirror reflecting everything she had spent a lifetime trying to hide. And maybe, for the first time since Luca's death, her fear wasn't about losing power, it was about feeling again. The dining hall gleamed with the kind of luxury that swallows truth. Porcelain plates, silverware aligned like soldiers, wines chosen to soothe beasts. Valentina Moretti led the dinner as one leads a siege. Sharp eyes, a measured smile, each word placed precisely to maintain peace and conceal war. Adrian Castellano, seated beside her, looked too composed not to be tempting fate. Between them, only a breath of distance. Around them, allies who mistook toasts for loyalty. The air smelled of spice and calculation. Conversations revolved around contracts and territories, stories of power and betrayal disguised as elegant jokes. Valentina nodded sparingly, sliced her food with surgical precision, answered in ways that opened no doors. Adrian listened, anchoring his presence in the silence no one dared to interrupt. When the orchestra's violin shifted to a softer tone, he leaned slightly closer, as if following a secret. And then he did the unthinkable. He touched her hand in public without asking permission from the myth. The entire room froze, glasses halted mid-air. A waiter almost dropped the wine. Valentina didn't pull away, but her wrist betrayed the faintest tremor, a flash of flesh beneath steel. Adrian didn't press or linger. He simply rested his fingers over hers, a gesture that said, "I see you," without uttering a word. The music played on, but all anyone could hear was Skun remembering what it meant to be remembered. Forbidden romance always begins this way, in a small gesture that shifts the weight of the world. She met his gaze and let the blade show in her smile. The touch lasted only long enough to become a whisper at every table. When he withdrew his hand, conversations stumbled back into motion, guilty and rushed, pretending nothing had happened. But it had. The orchestra sounded louder, the chandeliers burned warmer, the perfumes grew heavier. Matters of the heart have cruel timing. They choose the exact moment when they cannot be chosen. Later that night, away from the table, she led him down a corridor of elegant shadows, marble floors, old paintings watching without mercy. She stopped, turned, her face just inches from his. "Never touch me in front of my men," she said, each syllable a decree. Adrian faced the storm and answered calmly, "Maybe it's time they see you're still human." The corridor seemed smaller. Their breaths, louder. Her pride wanted to laugh. The truth wanted to stay. Valentina stepped forward, then back, as if testing her own limits. Humanity is expensive, she whispered, and it usually charges in blood. He didn't move. Dangerous love charges anyway, he said. The difference is what's left afterward. The name of what burned between them remained unspoken, but it filled the air with the discipline of fire. Fate and secrecy began to trade cards right there in the same deck. They returned to the hall, and the night shifted. Conversations that once dragged now tripped over her name. Allies studied that touched the way generals study border maps. Valentina walked between the tables as if gliding over a frozen lake, composed, unshaken. Adrian followed half a step behind, a presence protective without appearing possessive, affection that dared not yet call itself affection. The dinner, born out of protocol, had turned into a stage where a single wrong word could cost more than reputation. At the height of the evening, a toast demanded the spotlight. Valentina lifted her glass with a queen's hand and a voice that carried sweet threat. To the peace we keep through discipline, a murmur of approval rippled like a golden current. Adrian raised his glass, eyes locked on hers, to the courage not to hide behind power. Crystal met crystal, the sound of a fracture, the violin's notes bent like a confession. Stories of redemption often dress as provocation before revealing themselves as hope. The stolen touch returned to her fingers like a memory of fire. Every movement afterwards seemed to echo that hidden heat. When an ally came too close with a joke about taming storms, Adrian cut him off with elegant precision, deflecting the blade without staining the stage. Valentina noticed. She didn't thank him, but her eyes did. And in her world, gratitude was almost apology, almost surrender, almost faith. As the night waned, the mansion seemed to tighten its walls. The false laughter from nearby tables, the metaphors about territory, the arithmetic of toasts. Everything faded, while her body remembered that there was still flesh beneath the myth. She hated to admit it, but she was no longer the woman who had entered that room to win. Yet she wasn't the woman who could afford to lose. She stood somewhere in between, the most dangerous place of all. In the garden, between lanterns and shadow, their final exchange unfolded without witnesses. "You crossed a line," she said. "I know," he replied, "and I'd do it again." There was tenderness in his defiance, peace in his stubbornness. "Don't mistake impulse for redemption," she warned. "I don't mistake anything when it comes to you." Those words struck deeper than his touch minutes before. Love and redemption share a cruel habit. They arrive precisely when everything is built to drive them away. When the party ended, the cars were called, the smiles tucked away, the promises postponed. In the final corridor, where the lights always seemed to stretch longer, Adrian stopped before her. "I didn't touch you to provoke," he said. "I touched you because I couldn't stand watching you so alone among so many people." Valentina breathed slowly, weighing the verdict. "I'm not alone. I belong to an empire." He nodded. And even so, two words that carried the weight of a world. She entered the mansion like a soldier returning to the front. In her room, the jewels rested on velvet, but the weight never left her body. The mirror reflected the same sovereignty, only now a little more human around the edges. In the silence that followed, her fingers remembered the warmth of his touch, and her disciplined, treacherous heart recorded it as both danger and shelter. Intense love doesn't ask permission, it takes up space. Outside in his office, Adrian turned a light on and off again, as if speaking to his own shadow. The touch burned in him too, not as a victory, but as a choice. He knew the line had been crossed. He also knew there was no returning home. From that moment on, everything would be an attempt to deserve what neither of them dared to admit they wanted. The night stretched across the rooftops, carried by a wind that whispered of change. Somewhere else in the city, old men debated numbers and loyalties. The world that sustained their empire demanded sacrifice, and every passion, sooner or later, presented its bill. Valentina rested her forehead against the cold window, her breath fogging the glass. "Humanity comes at a price," she whispered to herself. And she realized that, Unwilling as she was, she'd already begun paying in installments. Down the hall, deliberate footsteps approached and passed. The house seemed to listen. Family portraits watched without pity, like witnesses from an ancient trial. The promise of distance was beginning to crumble at its weakest point, the touch. There had been no kiss, no confession, yet her body already said yes where her lips still said no. Dangerous love learns to survive on crumbs until the feast arrives. As the night finally gave way to what felt like the last watch before dawn, a premonition settled on her shoulder like a bird that wouldn't sing. Nothing had exploded yet, but everything was set to. The dinner that had turned into war had left behind maps, routes that no strategist could ever predict. The kind that run through the heart. And through the heart, no army wins without loss. She turned off the light. The room sank into a thick, almost tender darkness. For a second, she allowed herself to imagine a world where touch didn't cost kingdoms, where secrets could rest. Just for a second. Because beneath the silence, something waited for morning. Hard. Undeniable. Ready to turn desire into sentence and tenderness into target. And fate, patient as ever, was already sharpening the blade for its next move. The night arrived like a verdict, slow and inevitable. The mansion felt different now, heavier, quieter, as if its walls breathed with her. Valentina Moretti walked through the corridors with the weight of her own destiny on her shoulders. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying the distant echo of thunder. Every sound felt like a warning, the calm before collapse. Adrian sat in his office, staring at documents that no longer mattered. Since the dinner, something had shifted between them. It wasn't confessed love, nor restrained hatred. It was an invisible tension made of everything left unsaid. He waited for her, though he didn't know why. Valentina climbed the stairs, haunted by the dream she'd had the night before. Luca had been there, standing in a haze of smoke and light. Love isn't weakness, Val. It's the only thing that survives power. She had woken with her heart on fire and her face wet with tears. At the top of the stairs, Marco De Luca was waiting. The counselor, a man of trust and poison, watched her with false reverence. "The council wants proof of loyalty," he said, his voice too soft to disguise the threat. Valentina didn't answer. She knew exactly what that meant. When the council asked for proof, the price was always blood. "You know what has to be done," he added. She gave a faint nod, cold on the outside, though inside her stomach tightened like a clenched fist. Hours later, alone in her room, she lit a cigarette and stared at her reflection in the window. The moonlight carved her face like a cracked mask. She knew what they wanted, Adrian's death. The man who, without asking, had begun to fill the space she'd sworn to keep empty. The conflict inside her was visible even in her hands, trembling slightly as she held the glass. Power demanded sacrifice. Love demanded surrender. And neither was compatible with survival. Outside, thunder rolled closer. Adrian appeared at the door, his gaze steady, quiet. "May I come in?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He walked to the window, watching the rain begin to fall. "The clouds are heavy," he said softly. "Looks like it's about to break." She replied, "Some storms are necessary." Her tone was neutral. But inside she was begging him to understand what she couldn't say. Adrian glanced at her, saying nothing. He saw something in her eyes, a sadness that didn't belong to the woman everyone feared. "You're different," he said quietly. Valentina turned away. "Maybe marriage is finally showing its effect." He gave a humorless smile. "Or maybe you're just tired of pretending you don't feel anything." The words hit precisely where they shouldn't. She didn't answer. She only turned back to the glass, letting her reflection speak for her. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Adrian stepped closer, slowly, carefully, respecting the distance she built like a wall. "I know something's wrong," he said. "I may not know what it is, but I can feel it. And if it's hurting you, then it's hurting me too." Valentina wanted to laugh, to scream, to order him out, but all she managed was a whisper. "Don't say that." "Why not?" he asked. She closed her eyes. "Because pain is the only thing that still belongs to me." For a moment he thought of reaching for her, but the gesture died before it began. They stood there side by side, watching the rain run down the glass, two still bodies trapped in the same storm of fear and desire. Love, when forbidden, breathes differently. Later, when he left, Valentina sat at the edge of the bed and drew a long breath. The memory of Luca returned, unrelenting. "Don't do what they expect. Do what's right." The words echoed like a gentle ghost. But doing what was right now felt like the most dangerous choice of all. She rose, walked to the mirror, and faced her reflection. For the first time she didn't see the boss. She saw the woman. Marco appeared again, unannounced. "Tomorrow's the moment," he said. "If you hesitate, they'll act on their own." "I know," she replied. He leaned closer, his voice smooth as poison. "You've fallen for him, haven't you?" Her gaze turned to ice. "Watch what you're implying, Marco." But the threat came out weaker than she intended, and his eyes caught it. "Love, Valentina. It's a luxury that kills slowly." When he left, she remained alone with the sound of rain. The clock struck 2. On the nightstand, a gun rested beside the family ring, two symbols of what she had become. Between them, an abyss. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, thinking of all the times she'd chosen the Empire over herself. But now, for the first time, the choice seemed impossible. In his own room, Adrian couldn't sleep either. The wind rattled the windows, reminding him of her touch, of that restrained look that spoke more than any confession could. He sensed something was coming. The house carried that scent, the scent of decision. He lit a cigarette, took a slow drag, and whispered into the emptiness. Love doesn't need her permission, but it does need the courage to stay. By morning, the sun appeared weak, hesitant, too fragile to chase away what the night had left behind. Valentina dressed in black, as if mourning something not yet lost. She descended the staircase slowly, her face calm, her soul in conflict. Every step felt like the last before something she couldn't name. Marco waited by the door, the car ready, the plan in place. She looked at him and said only, "Tonight, everything ends." He smiled, satisfied, not realizing that when she said those words, she wasn't speaking of death. She was speaking of choice, of redemption. And when Adrian appeared at the top of the stairs, his gaze cutting through her defenses like light through smoke, time seemed to stop. Fate was ready to decide who would survive, the Empire or love. Thunder roared again, closer this time. The wind swept away the last trace of certainty. The house was silent, but not with peace. It was the silence of something about to collapse. Valentina Moretti walked slowly through the main hall, her heels echoing like a clock counting down the end. The plan was in motion. Marco De Luca had arranged everything. The wedding night would be the perfect setting for the council's command to be carried out. An intimate celebration, a hidden gun, a life to be erased in the name of the Empire. But inside her, that empire was already crumbling. That morning, she had looked in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. The face was the same, the power still there, but the eyes betrayed what the heart was hiding, fear of fulfilling her own promise. Something new had taken root, something she couldn't name. It was hesitation. It was love. It was weakness, according to the code she herself had written years ago. As night fell, the mansion turned into a stage of rehearsed calm. The lights were softer, the glasses fuller, the footsteps slower. Adrian descended the staircase with the serenity of a man unaware of his own sentence. His eyes searched for her, and she realized she no longer knew how to hide. She wore black silk, the color that always made her feel invincible. But tonight the fabric felt heavier than gold. When he saw her, he stopped. Time hung between them, the air caught mid-breath. "You look beautiful," he said easily, as if stating an old truth. Valentina replied with irony, "Tonight that's the only marital duty you'll be fulfilling." The line was meant to be armor, but her tone faltered for an instant. Adrian smiled, not a provocative smile, but one that simply accepted. And that disarmed her more than any threat ever could. They dined alone, the wine marking a rhythm that matched an anxious heart. Valentina spoke little, her answers short, as though every word risked too much. Adrian, on the other hand, seemed calm, unaware of the storm encircling him. Their conversation drifted through small talk, travels, art, memories, yet beneath every syllable ran an undercurrent of tension that needed no voice. While he spoke, she thought of the instructions. The counselor's voice echoed in her head. Wait for the right moment. A drink, a distraction, then silence. It was supposed to be simple, but nothing about her was simple anymore. Every time she looked at Adrian, something stopped her. And when he looked back, it was as if he could see her completely. Her fears, her cracks, her contradictions. No enemy had ever done that. Dinner ended, but silence lingered. She stood and whispered, "Wait for me in the room. There's something I need to take care of first." He nodded. Valentina walked to the office, opened a drawer, and took out the gun. The cold metal grazed her skin, and a shiver ran through her body. She took a deep breath, though it trembled on the way out. Lucas seemed to be there behind her, repeating the words from her dream. Love is not weakness. For several seconds she stood still, staring at the reflection of the gun in the mirror. It was as if she was seeing her own fate reflected back. She could end it all right there, return to being the woman everyone feared. But for the first time the thought of winning exhausted her. The Empire had cost too much. Her soul, her sleep, the last fragments of her humanity. She slid the gun beneath her dress, between fabric and skin, and walked toward the bedroom. The lights were dim. Adrian waited, sitting on the edge of the bed, unaware that he was moments away from the quietest judgment of his life. He rose when she entered, his gaze steady, his voice soft. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." He stepped closer, slowly, fearlessly. The air thickened, the space between them becoming a suspended promise. "You don't have to keep pretending," he said. She frowned, or pretended to. "Pretending what?" He gave a faint smile. "That you don't feel. That the whole world is a battlefield." She wanted to laugh, to deny, but her throat betrayed her. Adrian touched her face gently, as if afraid to break her. "I don't want your empire, Valentina. I just want you to breathe." The words echoed inside her like doors unlocking after years in the dark. The plan was falling apart. The gun now felt like blasphemy. "You don't understand," she said, stepping back. "There are things bigger than us." "Then let them come," he answered. "I'm not leaving." Her breathing quickened. Time lost its shape. And for an instant, Valentina Moretti, the woman who ruled with an iron hand, felt the aching desire to simply be a woman. One who could close her eyes and not think about wars. The closeness between them was a spark ready to set the world on fire. She wanted to resist, but her body betrayed her mind. His fingers brushed against hers, and the world seemed to stop. Tension became silence. Silence became confession. Valentina looked at him and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Peace. But with it came fear. Fear that everything might end right there. In the mirror's reflection, the glint of the gun reminded her of what was at stake. Adrian leaned closer, their faces almost touching. "If you're going to die tomorrow," he whispered, "at least live tonight." And in that moment she understood. The war destroying her wasn't the one on the streets. It was the one inside her. Rain began to fall outside, soft, steady, as if the sky itself were trying to cleanse what was about to happen. Valentina rested her face against his shoulder and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt alive. And she knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Not her, not him, not the Empire. The gun was still there, hidden between silk and fear. But that night, her heart carried a far heavier weight. Because in Valentina Moretti's world, love was the most unforgivable crime of all. Night fell over the empire like a veil. The distant sound of rain blended with the crackle of the fireplaces, and every shadow in the mansion seemed to hold secrets better left asleep. Valentina Moretti entered the room slowly, as if walking into her own fate. The lights were soft, golden. The air smelled of wine and fear. Adrian stood by the window, looking at the heavy sky. When she appeared, he turned, and in his eyes there was neither dominance nor submission, only truth. She wore black silk, the fabric gliding over her skin like a confession. No jewelry, no rings, nothing that resembled the woman the world feared. Only her, whole, stripped of persona, without the armor of coldness. Adrian drew a slow breath, as if trying to memorize the moment. "So this is where the empire ends?" he asked with a faint smile. Valentina replied softly, almost a whisper, "No, this is where it begins to fall." For a second they just looked at each other. The silence was thick, their breathing filling the space. He stepped closer, unhurried, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't step back either. Adrian reached out, and the touch was light, almost reverent. Her skin burned beneath it, as though it were the first time anyone had ever touched her without trying to own her. Time lost its rhythm. The sound of rain faded into distance. Valentina felt her body respond before her mind could catch up. Her heart, long trained for battle, now beat in surrender. She tried to speak, but the words died between her lips. He noticed and whispered, "You don't have to be strong right now." She looked at him, and something inside her broke. The fortress collapsed in silence, like a wall too tired to resist. Adrian drew her close with care, as if touching an ancient secret. His hands slid over her face, erasing the fear, the hate, leaving only the woman who had forgotten she existed. She closed her eyes and felt her body surrender, like someone finally returning home after years of wandering. It was strange, almost painful, to discover she could still feel. For a moment the world seemed safe. The rain outside became melody, and the wind whispered promises no one would dare repeat. Valentina couldn't tell if she was crying or simply breathing too deeply. Every movement was a silent confession. His touch said, "I see you." And in silence she answered, "Then save me from myself." When Adrian kissed her, there was no urgency. It was a restrained kiss, tense, made of everything they had tried to avoid. Fire and calm coexisted, and time, complicit, pretended not to exist. Her hands, once steady, now trembled. It was as if the weight of power, the armor, everything she had built to protect herself, melted away through her fingers. And in its place remained only her heart, raw, alive, unguarded. They pulled apart for a moment, and Valentina breathed, unsteady, disoriented. "You don't understand, Adrian. I can't love." He smiled, tired, but honest. "You don't have to. Love doesn't ask permission, remember?" She tried to look away, but couldn't. The tears came without warning, silent, like a confession her body could no longer hide. Adrian brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You don't need an empire," he said softly. "You need peace." The words echoed like a vow. Valentina closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against his. For the first time in years, she allowed herself simply to exist. Her heart, that had beaten for survival for so long, now beat for something simple: presence. That night wasn't about passion, it was about surrender. There was no haste, no promise. Just two weary souls trying to find shelter in each other. As the fire burned low in the hearth, the world outside crumbled, and they stayed there, unmoving, protected by a truce's fate would never allow to last. When morning came, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, replacing words with silence. Valentina slept against Adrian, her face calm, almost at peace. He ran his fingers through her hair and smiled faintly. A sad smile, the kind that knows life rarely forgives moments like this. The gun still lay on the table, forgotten. The council still awaited its proof of loyalty. But none of it mattered now. There was only the quiet sound of her breathing, blending with the wind drifting through the open window. And in that brief instant of peace, Valentina finally understood what Luca had tried to tell her in her dream. Love is the only power that survives power. And ironically, it's also the one that destroys it. Dawn broke grey and heavy, as if the sky had witnessed their confession, and now carried the weight of guilt. Valentina woke with her face pressed to Adrian's chest, listening to his calm breathing, and for a brief moment she believed the world could stop right there. But the clock kept time with cruelty, and every second sounded like a reminder: peace does not belong to the guilty. She rose slowly, trying not to wake him. She put on her robe and walked to the window. The city stretched out beyond, indifferent to the tragedy that had not yet come. Her thoughts were a maze of steel and regret. Her body still held the warmth of the night, but her heart was already freezing at the thought of the inevitable choice. She knew the council would find out. Sooner or later, they always do. Adrian opened his eyes and watched her in silence. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, drawing golden lines over her body. He moved behind her and took her hand, but she didn't respond. "What is it?" he asked. Valentina took a moment to answer. "Nothing lasts forever, Adrian. Especially what is true." He felt the meaning behind the words and felt the ground begin to slip away. Before he could say anything else, a sound cut through the silence, the sharp slam of doors opening. Hasty footsteps, whispered voices. Marco De Luca entered with 4 armed men, his face tense and his eyes full of fury. "She's fallen in love with the enemy," he shouted, his voice echoing through the halls. Instinctively, Adrian stepped in front of Valentina. Her gaze, once cold, now burned with desperation. "Get out of the way, Castellano," Marco said, brandishing his weapon. "This isn't about you." But Adrian didn't move. "Everything's about me now," he replied. Time seemed to stop. Tension was palpable. Marco's men leveled their guns, ready to follow orders no one dared question. Valentina's breath grew short, unstable. For a second she hesitated. The next second she grabbed her own gun. The metallic sound echoed like thunder through the mansion. "Touch him and I'll destroy every one of you," she said, her voice low and steady. The henchman froze. Marco laughed without humor. "Will you betray the council for a man, Valentina? Will you throw away everything you spent a lifetime building?" She held his stare, eyes wet but unyielding. "I already threw away what mattered most. Now, at least, I know why." Adrian looked at her, confused, amazed. "You don't have to do this," she answered. "No, I do. For the first time, I do." Marco stepped forward, trying to provoke her. "Luca would be ashamed of you." The name of her brother triggered her. The gun trembled in her hands, but her eyes ignited with an old pain. "Don't say his name." Thunder split the sky. Wind swept through the room from the open windows, lifting the curtains like flags of war. The scene seemed suspended between the real and the inevitable. Adrian reached out and touched her arm, whispering, "Let's get out of here." Marco shouted orders and his men moved. Everything unfolded in seconds: shouts, footsteps, the sharp sound of safety catches being released. Valentina fired first. Not to kill, but to remind them who she was. The shot rang out, cutting through the mansion like a loud confession. The henchman backed away, hesitant. Marco went pale. His pride was wounded more than his body. "You're finished, Valentina. The council will hunt both of you to the end." She didn't blink. "Then they'll have to find me alive." Adrian held her hand, and for an instant the world fell silent. 2 fugitives surrounded by memories, surrounded by shattered loyalties. Love now was a death sentence. And yet, amid the chaos, something pure remained, her gaze steady and fearless, saying what her lips didn't need to: "I chose you." They ran through the corridor as footsteps multiplied behind them. The marble reflected flashes of light and sound. And the mansion, once a stage for alliances and betrayals, had become a maze of escape. Valentina gripped Adrian's hand tightly, as if fate itself could be rewritten through the strength of that hold. At the gate, the rain fell hard, washing away blood that hadn't yet been spilled. She turned back for one last look at the house. The Moretti Empire, her kingdom of iron and guilt, was now nothing more than a collapsing prison. "It's over," she said more to herself than to him. Adrian cupped her face and replied, "No, it's beginning." Headlights cut through the darkness. Marco appeared in the distance, shouting something the wind carried away. Valentina pulled Adrian into the car and sped off without looking back. The sound of the tires tearing through wet asphalt blended with thunder. And as the city disappeared in the rearview mirror, she realized that all that remained was the choice she had made, and the price that would follow. The woman who never believed in love was now killing for it. And fate, patient as ever, watched, preparing its final move. The road stretched ahead like a scar. The car sliced through slick curves, every drop of rain falling with purpose. Valentina Moretti drove with her eyes fixed forward, her fingers tight around the wheel, as if motion itself was the only thing keeping her alive. Adrian sat beside her, watching her profile under the trembling flashes of lightning. The silence between them was the loudest sound in the world. The city lay behind, along with vows, blood, and empire. Ahead, only an empty road, and the sound of the engine breathing in tension. "There's no going back," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "There never was," he replied. The words fell like both freedom and sentence. Valentina drew a deep breath, and for the first time the air felt different, raw, unclaimed, alive. When dawn began to break, they reached the coast. The sea stretched grey and furious, crashing against the rocks with ancient rage. She stopped the car and stepped out, the wind striking her face like punishment and comfort at once. Adrian followed. Salt clung to their skin, cold bit through their clothes, and still there was something sacred in the moment. The empire of iron had fallen, and before the ocean, nothing remained, only them and the weight of their choices. Valentina walked to the edge, her dress clinging to her body, hair wild in the wind. "I spent my life trying to defeat fear," she said, staring at the horizon. "And I learned that fear is all that's left when love is denied." Adrian approached slowly, as if nearing an altar. "You saved me," he said. "I didn't do it for you," she replied. "I did it because I couldn't stand being who I was anymore." For a moment they simply stared at the sea. The sky opened in shades of silver and storm grey. The wind carried their words away before they could hurt. Adrian took her hand. "What now?" he asked. Valentina looked down at the mafia ring, the symbol of her empire, the weight of an entire life. She slipped it off her finger and held it tightly in her palm. The metal felt alive, warm, as if refusing to be abandoned. She studied it for a moment, then closed her fist hard. "This is all that's left of the woman I used to be." She walked toward the wet sand and opened her hand. The ring fell slowly, spinning, until it disappeared beneath the waves. The sound of the ocean drowned everything, the past, the oaths, the blood. Adrian stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What did you just do?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I chose to live," she said. The sky broke open in rain. Drops hit her face, mingling with the tears she finally allowed herself to shed. It wasn't sorrow, it was release. Her whole body trembled, as if each tear washed away a piece of what was left of her old self. Adrian turned her toward him and touched her face. "You're free now," he murmured. She smiled, brief, fragile. "Freedom hurts more than I expected." They kissed in the rain, and for a moment the world seemed to forgive. The sea roared, the wind howled, but there, between storm and salt, there was peace. It was the kind of love born from chaos, meant to last only as long as fate allowed, a second or forever. When they finally parted, her eyes were calm, as if the entire inferno inside her had gone quiet. In the distance, the sound of helicopters tore through the sky. The council was coming. War was inevitable. Adrian looked at her, ready to run, but Valentina shook her head gently. No more running. I've been running from myself my whole life. He understood. They stood there, holding each other as the wind swept the sand around them. The sea swallowed the ring. The rain washed away every name carved into the past. The woman who didn't know how to love now loved, and that was both her punishment and her redemption. I told you I didn't know how to love, she said with a soft, broken smile, but you showed me what it means. Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. Then it was worth it. The helicopter drew closer, its sound rising, relentless. She looked at him one last time, with the serenity of someone who had made peace with fate. If living is a choice, I choose you. He wanted to answer, but the roar of the blades swallowed his words. And as the wind lifted the sand in a wild spiral, they vanished into the mist, 2 names erased by their own courage. Hours later, the sea returned a single object to the shore, the Moretti ring. Half buried in sand, surrounded by footprints that led to nowhere, the symbol of lost power, now just a memory. The empire had fallen, but love somehow had survived. Her power fell like the crumbling walls of an ancient castle, but love remained. Silent, stubborn, eternal. Valentina Moretti lost everything she could lose, except the one thing that truly set her free, the courage to feel. In the end, she learned that redemption doesn't come from victories, but from the choices we make when we have nothing left. If this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications to follow more tales of passion, power, and redemption.